So, James, France has Corsica, where I went on holiday recently in September. Lovely place, good food, good beaches. Next to that, Italy has Sardinia. Both of these are glittering destinations full of yachts and sun and sea and rugged landscapes and so on. Very popular with their countrymen. And of course, listeners will know that Britain has its own glistening summer paradise. Isn't that right, James?
Martin, I must admit, I'm struggling a bit. You've lost me. Where on earth could you be talking about?
So I'm talking, of course, about the Isle of Wight, the sort of yacht-infested lump of chalk that sits just off Portsmouth and Southampton on the other side of the Solent, which, by the way, used to be a river. This is where the Spanish Armada were going to set up their first base when they tried to invade in the 16th century, but they were denied by the royal fleet of our brave Queen Elizabeth I, although she wasn't actually on the ships at the time, of course. And that's one of many reasons, James, why we're not doing this podcast in Spanish. So a real pivotal point in British history.
Martin, if there's one thing I know about you, is that you're a man who likes his boats. So I'm terrified this is just going to turn into a long lecture about the history of the Royal Navy or something like this. Have you got a point here, or are we just talking about the Armada again?
I mean, that would be an amazing episode, but no, I'm getting there. So today, the Isle of Wight, it's a remarkably poor place, considering it's just off the coast of Hampshire. Like, it's right next to the cities of Southampton and Portsmouth. So on the one side of the Solent, you have big urban conurbations, you have roads, motorways, railways, world-class universities. You have, of course, the headquarters of the Royal Navy, the UK's second largest container port, and, of course, the massive throbbing economy of southeast England, the richest part of the UK. And it's literally as if life is passing the Isle of Wight by, because on the other side, you've got this small island with a terrible economy, no jobs, grinding poverty, some of the largest rates of child poverty in the UK, almost a third of children living in poverty. It's economically a disaster of a place.
Oh, that's weirdly upsetting because I didn't realise that. I mean, I've got some quite fond memories of the Isle of Wight. When I was around 9, my parents took me there on holiday, and we went to this sort of, I suppose it's a theme park. Don't think Disneyland, but it's proto sort of Victorian theme park, which is called Black Gang Chine, which sounds like, 3 ethnic slurs rolled into one, but it's actually a real name of a real place, and it's all above board. Though I remember, there's some fiberglass dinosaurs there. There was an amazing attraction that was built into one of the hillsides there called Snakes and Ladders. And what it was like a snakes and ladders board, but with like steps that you go up as you'd spin a spinner that was on the wall, and you would go a number of steps, and there was ladders to climb up, and then there was like slides to slide down to represent the snake. So a really high concept and clever idea for a visitor's attraction. And the other interesting thing about Black Gang Chine, again, not a slur, is that it's actually falling into the sea. It's getting loads of like coastal erosion around there. So the park keeps having to move all of its attractions further inland.
Yes, when I was growing up, we lived near Portsmouth on the south coast. And so Meridian Tonight, or Coast to Coast, the local TV news program in the 80s and 90s, basically every sort of few weeks would have a feature on, the latest bit of Black Gang Chine that's fallen into the sea and how they've had to move all the dinosaurs around again. So it's certainly a place where things are happening, possibly not the right things. Of course, we visited the Isle of Wight together. I think it was on one of your birthdays, possibly your 30th.
Yeah, it was definitely quite a long time ago now. I remember we went to the dockyard, of course, because you were with us and wanting to see the boats. And we took a hovercraft across to the Isle of Wight. That was very exciting. I think it's like the last remaining hovercraft service in Britain. So that was cool.
Yeah, and I mean, this sort of epitomizes the problem with the Isle of Wight, which is that you need to take either a boat or some newfangled contraption like a hovercraft to get there. So you basically have this island full of people who can't get jobs. There are loads of jobs in Hampshire, but they just can't get to them. The only way that people can get to the mainland is on ferry services like Redjet. And, they have to rely on them to commute to work, or if they want to get to larger hospitals for specialist things, or go to an airport, or basically go anywhere. But as you'll find, if you Google Redjet, the service is not one of Britain's finest. There are a lot of complaints. It's chronically unreliable. Ferries break down. They're routinely cancelled. It's right up there with the worst train lines. At one point, apparently, ferries were running with only 3 of their 4 engines working because the operator said they couldn't find enough spare parts to fix them. So it sort of gives you an idea, these just decrepit ferries limping back and forth between the Isle of Wight and the mainland. It's dire. And of course, if your train breaks down, you can just get a bus or take a car or get a taxi in emergency or whatever. But if the ferry breaks down, you're completely stuffed, like you're stuck on the island or off the island. That's it.
Which would be worse? I don't know.
Yeah.
But so this is, yeah, it's weird, like a single point of failure for an entire tens of thousands of people, I guess. I think at one point it was the largest constituency in the UK because they didn't want to break it up. There's an interesting facts. But anyway, so this is a single point of failure, Martin. So is there anything that can be done about this?
So normally on this podcast, we rely on you, obviously, to come up with the harebrained schemes. But in this case, we have an idea already baked in, and it is called, James, the Freedom Tunnel.
So I'm already on board. I love a good tunnel. So I guess they want to build a tunnel under the Solent, but why not a bridge?
So a bridge would be a nice idea, but it would be a massive engineering challenge. So obviously, first of all, you've got container ships coming in and out of Southampton. You've got the Royal Navy coming out of Portsmouth, and these are massive ships. Now, James, I know that you're a notorious fan of Canada, right?
Yeah, I was famous for a week in Canada. That's a whole other story, which one day I will tell on this podcast.
Absolutely. So you'll be familiar with Niagara Falls, of course, down near sort of Toronto kind of area.
Surprisingly, not a classy place. You imagine this sort of beautiful waterfalls and everything being lovely and serene and naturey. No, it's a horrible tourist resort. There's literally a big casino and a Burger King that has a roller coaster on the roof, just within view of the falls.
Yeah, I'd say it's up there with sort of Bournemouth as a spectacle. In fact, I think I possibly prefer Bournemouth. It's okay. It was very hot when I went there, full of tourists, and mostly I just wanted to sit down and have a Coke Zero. But I mention it because Niagara Falls, James, is roughly 58 meters tall, and that is the same height, believe it or not, as a Queen Elizabeth class aircraft carrier from top to bottom.
Bloody hell.
Now, we're not nautical experts here again, and I don't want to get too deep into it, but obviously not all of that is above water. But the point is a bridge is going to be in the way of lots of shipping. It's going to be very difficult to get around that. And also the geology of the Solent would make it quite difficult to build a bridge. It's a little bit like very often people talk about, oh, could you build a bridge across the Straits of Gibraltar? And the answer is no, because actually it's really, really difficult to get any kind of structure across there. The Solent, which is now a sort of an inlet, used to be a river valley. So years ago, listeners who are following along this podcast on Google Maps, as many of you I know do every week, the River Frome that comes through sort of Somerset and Dorset and comes out just north of Swanage and off the end of Bournemouth Beach, used to actually connect all the way along the south coast to the Solent, and there was kind of a chalk ridge across that kind of kept it in place. That eroded. There was some kind of accident, water flooded in, and now, tragically, the Isle of Wight is no longer connected to the Swanage Peninsula, which is basically why we have all this problem in the first place. Anyway, it's very awkward. It's very difficult to get across. Honestly, you're better off just getting a tunnel boring machine, or TBM as experts like us call them, and just going underneath the whole thing, being done with it.
So that sounds plausible to my non-engineering brain, Martin, but where exactly would this tunnel go?
So the idea is it would start just west of Portsmouth, around Gosport. It would go under the Solent, of course. That's the whole point of a tunnel. And it would pop up pretty much in the middle of the kind of triangle that Cowes and Ryde and Newport form on the sort of northeast of the island. So for the vast majority of the island population, it would be very accessible. The idea is this would be a road tunnel, a bit like the Lower Thames crossing. And it would be pretty easy to link it up to the M27, which is the big motorway that goes between Portsmouth and Southampton. From there, you've got easy access to those cities. You can get to the M3, the A3M, up into London. You can get to Heathrow pretty easily, or at least if the M25 is not too bad. Southampton Airport, basically the world would be your oyster.
I'm slightly disappointed you're not pitching me a rail tunnel here, because I know the trains on the Isle of Wight, they're all old London Underground trains. So we know they can work underground, so why not just go a little bit further? But anyway, so the Isle of Wight is a poor place. The economy isn't great. Not many people live there. Digging a tunnel, it sounds plausible, I guess, from an engineering perspective from what you're saying, but is there actually a business case here? Is it worth it in economic terms? Who's going to pay for this?
I mean, can you put a price on freedom, James? But just to give a sense of the economics, because this is always the thing that comes up. Oh, it's going to be really expensive. Currently, these unreliable ferry operators rake in about £110 million a year for what is apparently a fairly dismal level of service. Now, some serious surveys have been done. They've had engineering firms, tunneling firms come and take a quick look. That'll cost you, kind of thing. And they put the cost of the tunnel at around about £3 billion, give or take. The idea would obviously be to make this a toll road, so you'd pay a certain amount to go back and forth. And advocates for the tunnel, there's a whole like campaign group pushing for it. They reckon it could generate about £200 million a year of income, which is a fairly conservative estimate. Obviously, you've got operating costs, ongoing maintenance that's going to eat into that a bit. But in theory, there's no reason why it couldn't pay for itself in, say, 15, 20 years.
And when you've got all these tourists coming across the Solent to go to Blackgang Chine, which will have been expanded to be like Disney World because you've got all these extra tourists, then think of the taxes there. Surely that makes sense. But I don't know. I guess, Martin, £3 billion, though, it is still a lot of money to find, especially at the moment. Rachel Reeves, I imagine, is probably isn't at the top of her list of things to spend money on at the moment. So is anyone really ever going to invest that much money in the Isle of Wight?
I think this is where you sort of have to look for solutions beyond the government. So I think it's fair to say, I don't want to disparage Keir Starmer or Rachel Reeves. I don't think they've got a big folder on the desk of number 10 or number 11 with plans to save the Isle of Wight on the front of it. I'm not sure that it's a massive national priority at the moment. But the best thing is we actually already have a model of how to do this and how to fund it very nearby in the Faroe Islands. So on the Faroe Islands, there are only 54,000 people. And that compares to 140,000 on the Isle of Wight. So Isle of Wight population is 2 or 3 times the size. And not only that, but as we've mentioned, the Isle of Wight is right next to major cities, major shipping ports, major transport connections and the mainland. Faroe Islands, again, not to disparage any listeners from the Faroe Islands, but you're pretty much in the middle of nowhere. So, it's a more challenging thing to get investment for. And yet they were able to do that. They were basically able to fund a vast network of something like 20 odd road tunnels between the various islands, basically by borrowing the money from the bank and repaying it with toll roads. So I think if it's clearly financially viable for an isolated population of 50,000 people, it's really hard to imagine why you couldn't do the same for an island of 140,000 that's right off the south coast.
Honestly, Martin, I know this sounds crazy, but I sort of went into this thinking, oh, here we go. We'll have a sort of fun segment about digging a tunnel to the Isle of Wight because our audience are the sort of people who like looking at maps and imagining railway lines going between things and that sort of thing. We love crayons on a map sort of thing. But this is all a bit of fun. Nobody's taking this seriously. But now I think I'm sold. Why aren't we doing this? This is crazy. This seems like an obvious idea if it makes that much sense.
Objectively, it's a brilliant idea. And I also think it would be a brilliant idea to have an episode where we just look at a map and draw fun imaginary tunnels on it. I think that would be an excellent Christmas special. As ever, you have the usual sort of array of the kind of Cheems mindset excuses. So, it's too expensive. It's too difficult, blah, 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 blah. So the biggest problem, James, and the reason why it's unlikely to happen and actually previous efforts have failed, is that it turns out that one man's prison is another man's castle. And so why lots of islanders would prefer to just kind of be able to move around and have freedom and, not live in grinding poverty, there is a vocal group of people who are militantly opposed to any kind of fixed link to the evil mainland. They're basically like the sort of the equivalent of the, the anti-HS2 people in Buckinghamshire, for example, really kind of full on against it.
But they're not even like that, Martin, because unlike the anti-HS2 people in Buckinghamshire, people in the Isle of Wight, they would benefit from the tunnel. It's not like the railway line just going near them. It's not like the tunnel is going somewhere else to join up to other places. They would literally benefit directly.
Exactly. And yet they're so vocal that it actually led to an earlier railway link about 2 decades ago being completely abandoned as a concept. So to give you a sense of the flavour, the kind of tone of the opposition, I'll give you a couple of quotes from it. There was one woman interviewed by the Daily Echo a few years ago who said that the tunnel would destroy the Isle of Wight's plans to become a self-sufficient and carbon-neutral eco-island, which is the kind of statement I think we could do a whole other episode on, to be honest.
It reminds me of the North Korean, was it Juche ideology, where it's all like self-sufficiency, something like that. But how the hell are we talking about self-sufficiently? The Isle of Wight surely it's inherently dependent on everywhere else. It's a tiny island. You can't get microchips on the Isle of Wight. They don't grow or manufacture them there.
Yeah, the Isle of Wight is about as self-sufficient as my wine fridge. It's, it's sunny. Apparently, they grow a lot of asparagus. They're famous for that on the Isle of Wight. Heritage tomatoes. But if you want anything other than a tomato and asparagus salad, you're pretty stuffed. There's barely any crops. I don't think you get more than a few loaves of bread from the whole island. It's madness. So again, we have this kind of I guess, green fantasy of a place where everyone's sort of okay with being poor. But my favorite quote comes from a man who was speaking to a Vice reporter several years ago. Do you remember Vice, James?
Yeah,
Older magazine.
yeah, but talking about the Isle of Wight, it seems a little bit unambitious of Vice. Shouldn't it be someone like taking ketamine with the Taliban or something? That's more Vice's sort of vibe.
No, I think this was in their era where they tried to do more quaint journalism, and before I don't even know what happens to them now. Did they fold? It's a topic for another time. But one of their reporters interviewed a chap who said, and I'll try and do the Isle of Wight accent justice, "The island is a castle, and the Solents is the moat that protects us. Once you let down the drawbridge, the castle falls."
Where is the Isle of Wight? It felt like a Scottish island, but then turned into like Winston Churchill. Like
It's somewhere to the south and west, James. That's all I really know. But I mean, this is someone who basically thinks the Isle of Wight is, I don't know, King's Landing or something, and that people from the mainland are basically White Walkers.
I'll be honest, Martin, I don't understand that reference. I'm not quite clever enough for HBO, but it does make me think of the community in 28 years later, the recent film, where there was this little sort of medieval pre-industrial community on a tiny island, scared of going to the mainland because of all of the zombies.
Yeah, I mean, essentially that. And I mean, if anything, I guess the question should be, do the English actually want to deal with these people being able to come over on a regular basis? But in any case, unlikely to happen any soon because, with the islands so divided and so much strong opposition, the only way to resolve the issue politically would be a referendum. It was floated by a Conservative MP some years ago, but they weren't particularly keen. Obviously, other referendums have happened since then and have not turned out well for really anybody involved. So no sane politician wants to do a referendum on such a divisive topic again. And here we are. We have this prime piece of sunny southern England real estate that's just sort of limping on in poverty.
I love these positive stories that you bring to the pod, Martin.
I try my best, James.